What if there were a hidden force more destructive than evil? A force that poisons friendships, ruins empires, and bankrupts people without them even realizing it. The worst part? It spreads in silence, disguised as intelligence, and you've already seen it, maybe even in yourself. It doesn't grow from lack of knowledge, but from false certainty. The ones infected are always the loudest, the most convinced they're right. They look powerful, but the moment you press them, their mask begins to crack. You've met them before, the colleague who shuts you down, the friend who mocks your ideas, the leader who sounds brilliant but builds nothing. They think they're winning, but they're chained to the most dangerous lie of all, the belief that they are wise when they are not. And here's the danger. In a world that rewards appearance over truth, this force can destroy your reputation, drain your wealth, and cost you every opportunity. Psychologists gave it a name. Machiavelli would call it something far sharper. And once you see it, you'll never unsee it. There is a force more dangerous than ignorance itself, the illusion of intelligence. It moves silently, wearing the costume of wisdom, feeding on applause, and infecting entire generations with confidence they have not earned. These are not merely fools, they are actors on the grand stage of human vanity. They do not seek truth, they seek to appear above it. In every era, they emerge, loud, certain, and shallow, while the truly intelligent remain silent, watching, measuring, calculating. The fool who pretends to be wise always mistakes noise for depth and attention for respect. He does not pursue mastery, he pursues admiration. And when a society begins to reward appearance over ability, the masquerade becomes the law of the land. You see it in classrooms, boardrooms, parliaments, everywhere people clap before they think. Have you noticed how quick they are to praise complexity, even when they don't understand it? A fool learns early that silence makes him invisible, so he fills the void with words. He imitates conviction because he has none. He dresses his ignorance in the robes of certainty and rehearses the gestures of the intellectual, the frown of contemplation, the sigh of superiority, the knowing nod. Watch him at a dinner table. He cannot sit through 5 minutes of uncertainty. He must insert himself into every discussion, even when it's beyond his grasp, because silence terrifies him. It exposes the void, so he fills it with borrowed thoughts, rehearsed arguments, quotes half-remembered from books he never finished. He is not seeking to understand, he is seeking to be seen, and in this hunger to be seen, he becomes predictable, because once you observe the pretender long enough, you realize something chilling. He does not even know that he is pretending, he believes his own mask, he becomes addicted to it, and soon he cannot separate his reflection from his face. The world rewards the costume. Institutions love pretenders because they speak the right language of performance. They decorate their sentences with impressive words, but none of it costs them anything. They say systemic, paradigm, socio-economic, and the crowd nods in submission. The moment you make others feel stupid, you gain power, and so stupidity evolves. It becomes fluent in disguise. These people dominate modern life because appearance is easier to sell than depth. Corporations promote them, schools celebrate them, social media crowns them. You scroll through your feed and see faces speaking with authority about things they barely comprehend, and millions listen. The algorithm rewards confidence, not competence. So the fool who pretends to be wise is not punished, he is celebrated. And when society begins to reward false wisdom, the truly wise withdraw, leaving the stage to the actors. Do you wonder why silence feels rarer every year? True intelligence questions itself. False intelligence defends itself. When a man is truly wise, his words are measured, his tone calm, his curiosity alive. But when a fool pretends to be wise, every disagreement becomes a threat. He cannot afford doubt because his entire identity is built on being right. He argues not to learn, but to survive. He does not listen, he waits to speak. His goal is not truth, it is domination through volume. Watch how quickly he raises his voice when cornered, how easily he mocks what he cannot understand. The wise man examines his ignorance like a surgeon, carefully, quietly, with no shame. The fool hides it like a wound. Which one are you? The one who listens before speaking, or the one who performs before thinking? There is no greater mask than intellect. It grants permission to condescend, to disguise insecurity as sophistication. Many of those who pretend to be intelligent were humiliated once. Perhaps they were ignored in youth, underestimated, or dismissed as unremarkable, and so they crafted a persona that could not be ignored. They discovered that pretending to know was more powerful than admitting they didn't. Every lie was a shield against inferiority, but the longer they wear it, the heavier it becomes. The mask demands maintenance. They must keep speaking, keep performing, keep defending the illusion, because if they stop, the silence will reveal how little there is underneath. It's a kind of hell, a performance that never ends. They fear exposure more than death, and yet you admire them. Why? Because the world taught you to equate confidence with competence. The deception runs deeper than arrogance. It seeps into the way people build relationships, the way they communicate, even the way they think. Many no longer think to understand, they think to impress. Every word becomes a competition, every conversation a subtle battle for status. Even in friendship, you will notice it. People listening not to grasp your point, but to find their turn to speak. When they nod, it's not agreement, it's calculation. They are searching for the next sentence that will make them appear clever. This is the quiet tragedy of the modern mind. Everyone talks, no one learns, and the more they pretend, the less they can actually see. Because once you commit to appearing smart, you stop growing. You build a castle of ideas, and then you trap yourself inside it. The most dangerous fools are the ones who no longer realize they are fools. They have worn their masks so long that they mistake imitation for identity. Their false wisdom becomes faith, and they begin preaching it to others. You will find them in universities, corporations, governments, men and women convinced of their genius, allergic to correction, addicted to the sound of their own voice. They claim to see the world clearly, yet cannot see their own reflection. They become immune to truth, because truth requires humility, and humility feels like death to the ego. When such people gather, they form a society where the loudest prevails, not the wisest, and in such a world, true intelligence becomes rebellion. Do you see it around you, a culture that fears silence, worships confidence, and confuses cleverness for wisdom? So we arrive at the first great deception, the fool pretending to be wise. It is not harmless. It shapes governments, ruins companies, and infects generations with arrogance masquerading as insight. You will see it in the boardroom strategist, who speaks in riddles to appear profound, in the influencer who recycles philosophy for attention, in the professor who ridicules students instead of guiding them. Each one plays the same game, to seem untouchable even when hollow. And the more they are rewarded, the more others imitate them. It spreads like perfume, pleasant at first, but toxic over time. Until one day, you begin to wonder, in a world obsessed with appearing smart, who among us is still thinking at all? They pretend because the truth would destroy them. A fool without his disguise is nothing but noise stripped of rhythm, motion without meaning. To admit ignorance is to descend the social hierarchy, to surrender the illusion of power. That is why the pretense exists, to survive in a world that punishes humility. It begins small, a false nod in a conversation, a borrowed opinion delivered with false certainty, and then it multiplies. Pretending to be smart becomes a reflex, a habit, a second skin. These people are not hungry for truth. They are starving for validation. They don't want to be correct. They want to be praised. That's the secret hunger you can see in their eyes when they speak. Not curiosity, not conviction, but a silent question. Do you believe I'm smart? Watch how the fool hunts for approval. Every sentence he speaks is bait. He thrives on reactions, laughter, agreement, admiration. His confidence isn't built on understanding but on applause. The moment the room falls silent, he collapses. Validation is the oxygen he cannot live without. He memorizes fashionable ideas, mimics the tone of thinkers, and repeats what others once said, hoping the glow of borrowed brilliance will reflect on him. He becomes a collector of quotes instead of a creator of thoughts. You'll see him brag about what he's been reading, yet never speak of what he's learned, because to him, reading is not nourishment, it's a costume fitting. Every book, every podcast, every conversation is an accessory for his ego. And when applause becomes the goal, truth becomes optional. Have you noticed how often people today mistake recognition for respect? The hunger for applause devours their integrity. It drives them to craft lives made of mirrors and smoke, where the reflection matters more than the man. They speak with absolute confidence about ideas they barely comprehend, exaggerate their achievements, and fabricate sophistication. Even in failure, they perform. The modern fool doesn't admit defeat, he reframes it, spins it, disguises it as strategy. To be real is to be weak, so he becomes his own press agent, forever curating a version of himself he believes others will envy. The tragedy is that the applause he chases is hollow. People don't admire him, they merely echo the performance. And yet, like a moth to a flame, he returns to the spotlight again and again, mistaking attention for validation, validation for worth, and worth for wisdom. The addiction is subtle but deadly. Once someone experiences the high of being praised for sounding intelligent, the rest of life feels unbearable. They can no longer tolerate being ordinary. They build conversations to be admired, not understood. They enter debates not to explore, but to win. Their identity becomes dependent on approval, a fragile currency that collapses the moment silence falls. You'll see them change opinions overnight to match the trend, flatter the powerful, or copy the language of whoever is being celebrated that week. They do not have beliefs, they have strategies. Their moral compass points wherever the applause is loudest. And the more you clap, the more you feed the disease. Have you ever noticed how a crowd can transform a fool into a prophet overnight? Applause blinds not just the performer, but the audience. Society begins to mistake visibility for value. The man on stage must be right. He is, after all, on stage. But the world does not reward truth, it rewards presentation. Look around, the most celebrated voices are not the most profound, but the most persistent. They speak loudly, confidently, continuously, and people obey. Their followers don't analyze, they imitate, and imitation breeds mediocrity. Entire cultures can be built on the repetition of clever lies. The same slogans, the same shallow optimism, the same recycled wisdom are passed off as enlightenment. The audience applauds because everyone else is applauding. This is how stupidity survives, not through ignorance, but through admiration. Have you wondered why people praise words they don't even understand? The hunger for applause is more than vanity. It is an infection that spreads through social validation. Every like, every compliment, every nod fuels the illusion of intelligence. In truth, they are terrified of silence, because silence reveals who they are when no one's watching. Real thinkers are comfortable there. They don't need applause because they are their own witness. Their thoughts are forged in solitude, not performance. The pretender, on the other hand, cannot sit still. He refreshes his screens, checks for responses, lives in the echo of others. His self-worth exists only when reflected back to him. The moment it disappears, so does his confidence. Tell me, how long could you survive if nobody noticed your thoughts? The crowd always loves the confident fool. He gives them certainty in uncertain times. He speaks quickly, decisively, without hesitation, and people mistake that for wisdom. But conviction without comprehension is just noise with rhythm. You can see it in leaders who promise without understanding, in influencers who preach without living, in colleagues who speak without knowing. They all feed on the same addiction, the applause of the uninformed. The more they are cheered, the less they question themselves. They believe their own performance, and when that happens, their ignorance becomes permanent. They are no longer pretending to be smart. They are convinced they are. That is when stupidity becomes power. And when stupidity gains power, how long before truth itself becomes irrelevant? The performance grows louder. Once the fool learns that confidence can outshine competence, he begins to weaponize language. He builds fortresses out of words, hoping that complexity will hide the emptiness within. The modern world rewards this kind of deception, the vocabulary of intellect without the labor of thought. Pretenders speak in riddles, not to enlighten, but to confuse. They wield jargon like a sword, slicing away anyone who cannot keep up. Discourse, framework, ideological construct, systemic paradigm. They speak in fog, not fire. They believe that if no one can understand them, they must be geniuses. But what they truly fear is simplicity. Simplicity unmasks frauds. A clear idea is a dangerous thing because it demands clarity of mind, and clarity exposes those who have none. Observe them in conversation. They use long words when short ones would suffice. They drown meaning beneath floods of terminology. Ask a simple question, and they'll reply with a speech. Challenge their explanation, and they'll accuse you of not being well read enough to understand. It's a clever trap, one that keeps them protected behind linguistic armor. But listen closely, and you'll notice something. Their words move in circles. There's no progression, no depth, only ornamentation. They imitate the rhythm of intellect, but not its rigor. It's not communication, it's camouflage. And as long as you're dazzled by the shine of their language, you'll never notice how hollow their thoughts really are. Have you ever left a conversation feeling impressed but not enlightened? That's not intelligence, that's theater. True intelligence simplifies. False intelligence complicates. A wise man can describe the universe with a metaphor. A fool requires a thesaurus to describe his lunch. Complexity, when used by the ignorant, is a defensive mechanism, a way to appear untouchable. It keeps people from asking questions, from discovering the absence of real knowledge underneath. You'll see it everywhere, in politicians who use 10 words to say nothing, in academics who mistake obscurity for prestige, in executives who use synergy to hide incompetence. They are all speaking the same language of evasion, and the crowd applauds because confusion sounds impressive when delivered with confidence. The tragedy is that people fear appearing simple more than appearing wrong, and so they imitate the same disease, repeating complicated nonsense just to belong. The fool who masters vocabulary becomes the most dangerous kind. He learns that the appearance of intellect can be used to manipulate others. People obey what they don't understand. When you make your speech sound profound enough, no one dares to challenge you. The more ambiguous your language, the safer you become. This is how fake wisdom infects societies, through the elevation of ambiguity. Look at the philosophers of confusion, the pseudo-thinkers who fill libraries with unreadable sentences, each one pretending to hold secret meaning. They hide ignorance behind poetry and call it philosophy. They make ordinary truths sound mystical, so the crowd will never notice there's nothing there. And the more confused the people become, the more they worship the speaker. Tell me how many of the world's so-called intellectuals have built their reputations on words no one can truly define. Every era has its prophets of noise. They dazzle with vocabulary, but deliver emptiness. In their presence, people feel small, and that's the point. By confusing others, the pretender reclaims control. It's a quiet form of domination. Make others doubt their own understanding, and they will surrender authority to you. It's the oldest trick of power, to make others feel inadequate. Even religion, politics, and academia have used it for centuries. Complexity as control, mysticism as manipulation. The truly intelligent, however, do the opposite. They make ideas accessible, not because they wish to be liked, but because they have mastered them. You cannot simplify what you do not fully understand. Simplicity is the final form of sophistication. Leonardo knew this. But ask yourself, when did simplicity start sounding like stupidity to you? The greatest minds in history spoke plainly. Machiavelli himself wrote in the language of the people, not the scholars. Because truth is sharpest when it is naked. The pretender, however, fears nakedness. He fears the direct, the clear, the simple. He feels exposed without layers of terminology to hide behind. His mind is not a temple of thought, it's a hall of mirrors. Each word reflects another, endlessly, until nothing real remains. You can feel this emptiness when you speak to such people. It's like being lost in a fog where every step feels profound but leads nowhere. And yet, people follow them. They nod, they quote, they repeat. Because humans are addicted to the sound of importance, even when it's meaningless. How many of the words you use each day actually belong to you, and how many were borrowed just to sound intelligent? The empty vocabulary is not just a symptom of stupidity. It is its disguise. It convinces the speaker that he is intelligent, and the listener that he is inferior. It builds entire hierarchies of false wisdom, where the one who confuses best reigns supreme. It's how entire industries survive, how politics distracts, how media deceives, how education flatters. Words are the weapons of both the wise and the foolish. The difference is purpose. The wise use them to reveal truth, the fool uses them to obscure it. And as long as people keep rewarding confusion over clarity, the world will continue to worship noise. But here's the question, when truth is spoken in simple words and no one listens, who then is truly the fool? Beneath every mask of intelligence lies something fragile, the ego. It is the trembling center that fuels the performance, the hidden engine behind every false display of wisdom. The fool cannot afford to be questioned because his identity is built on the illusion of being untouchable. To challenge him is to threaten his survival. That's why he reacts with such fury when exposed. Criticism feels like an assassination attempt. Even gentle correction is received as humiliation. The fragile ego does not seek to grow, it seeks to defend. It builds walls of justification, sarcasm, and pride. And when a person becomes addicted to being right, truth becomes irrelevant. Their arguments no longer aim for understanding, only for victory. You'll see it in debates, meetings, even friendships. People fighting not for what's true, but for who wins. Have you noticed how easily confidence turns into hostility the moment doubt enters the room? The pretender's greatest fear is not ignorance, it's exposure. He can tolerate being wrong in secret, but never in public. The moment his image cracks, he unravels. Watch what happens when you challenge someone whose confidence is built on pretense. Their body stiffens, their tone hardens, their words become sharp. They deflect, they mock, they change the subject. Anything but self-examination. Because deep down, they know that one honest question could tear down their entire persona. Their mind isn't a fortress, it's glass. Their pride is the glue holding it together. Once that pride is touched, everything begins to tremble. They are not angry at you, they are terrified of themselves. And yet, they will do anything to protect the illusion, even at the cost of truth, friendship, or dignity. Have you ever seen someone argue just to avoid silence? The fragile ego survives by rewriting reality. When proven wrong, it doesn't adjust, it distorts. The fool will twist logic, manipulate context, or simply deny the obvious. In their world, facts are negotiable, emotions are evidence, and self-image is law. You can present data, proof, or reason, it doesn't matter. The mind enslaved by ego will always bend reality to protect itself. That's why intelligent conversation has become rare. It requires the death of the ego. To truly listen is to risk transformation. To admit ignorance is to surrender status. And most people would rather live in the comfort of lies than face the discomfort of growth. The ego feeds on resistance, it starves in humility, which explains why those who appear most confident often learn the least. They are too busy defending their reflection to see the truth standing in front of them. The pretender's ego is a mirror, always turned outward. He sees himself only through the eyes of others. Every compliment strengthens him, every doubt wounds him. This dependence makes him volatile. He'll flatter those who validate him and attack those who don't. His morality shifts with his audience. His values adjust with his convenience. He will feign empathy if it earns applause, and feign ruthlessness if it earns fear. Everything is performance. The fragile ego is not a soul, it's a costume closet. He'll wear whatever mask keeps him admired, and when admiration fades, he'll destroy others to feel alive again. In politics, this becomes tyranny. In relationships, this becomes manipulation. In business, this becomes sabotage. It is the same disease, simply wearing different names. But look closely. Have you never caught yourself changing your tone just to protect your pride? Every argument that begins with "I'm right" is already lost. True intelligence doesn't cling, it explores. The wise man's ego is not fragile because it isn't the foundation of his identity. He can be wrong and remain intact. The fool cannot. His ego is built on borrowed thoughts, so every challenge threatens collapse. That's why pretenders rely on volume instead of reason, posture instead of principle. They need the room to believe in their dominance, because they cannot survive without witnesses. The wise man, in contrast, needs no audience. His worth is internal, measured by what he understands, not what he can prove. That's why his silence feels intimidating. It's the quiet of someone who doesn't need validation. But to the fragile ego, silence feels like death. So it fills the void with words, and those words become its coffin. If you want to see the true face of a man, do not look at him when he's winning. Look at him when he's contradicted. The pretender will explode, retreat, or mock. The wise will pause, reflect, and adapt. One reacts, the other evolves. This difference determines who rises and who collapses. The fragile ego cannot build anything lasting, because every foundation it lays must first protect its pride. That's why entire institutions decay from within, not because they lack intelligence, but because they are governed by ego. Leaders who cannot be corrected become blind. Teams that fear truth become corrupt. Nations that worship pride destroy themselves. The fall of empires begins with the rise of fragile egos. Tell me, when was the last time you listened to someone without secretly preparing your reply? The fragile ego is a silent tyrant. It lives within all of us, whispering, "Don't let them see you doubt." It hates humility, despises curiosity, and fears growth. It keeps people loud but empty, confident but blind. Every time you defend what you don't truly understand, you feed it. Every time you argue to protect your image instead of your insight, you serve it. And the more you feed it, the more it rules you. Most people are not thinking, they are defending, not learning, performing, and they call that living. So the question becomes, in your pursuit of being seen as intelligent, how much of your true intelligence have you already buried? The stage is now set. Once the ego hardens and the mask becomes permanent, the pretender discovers his next talent, manipulation. He learns that words can move crowds, not through truth, but through rhythm and repetition. He studies the faces of others the way a con artist studies cards. He mimics conviction, calibrates tone, and learns that if he speaks with enough confidence, people will supply the logic he lacks. This is the puppet stage, where imitation becomes influence. Here, stupidity becomes strategy. The fool who pretends to be wise realizes that the world is full of listeners who crave certainty, not clarity. And so he gives it to them. He plays the prophet, the mentor, the visionary, all masks borrowed from better men. He doesn't need to understand what he's saying, he only needs to sound like someone who does. And in a society that worships authority over accuracy, this is enough to rule. Watch how the pretender moves. His power doesn't come from what he knows, but from how he makes others feel. He flatters the ambitious, mocks the uncertain, and praises the obedient. His goal is not to teach, but to control the emotional temperature of every room he enters. He will say something bold, pause for reaction, then mirror the faces that admire him. It's a calculated theater of charisma, an illusion of wisdom sustained by performance. He doesn't lead by substance, he leads by spectacle. Crowds mistake confidence for competence, eloquence for depth, charisma for intellect. They see a man who sounds sure of himself and assume he must know something they don't. And the pretender learns a dangerous truth. People don't follow reason, they follow tone, which makes manipulation the highest form of stupidity disguised as genius. Have you ever trusted someone simply because they sounded certain? The puppet stage thrives on followers. The pretender needs an audience the way fire needs oxygen. The more people repeat his words, the more powerful he feels. He crafts his identity through others. Their admiration is his proof of intelligence. Without them, he is nothing. That is why manipulators are never silent. They cannot survive in obscurity. They speak endlessly, not to communicate, but to stay relevant. They infect conversations, dominate discussions, and drown out dissent. Their goal is not connection, it is control. The room becomes their mirror, reflecting back a brilliance that does not exist. And yet, the crowd loves them, because people would rather be entertained by a confident liar than educated by a humble thinker. That is the tragedy of human psychology. We are drawn not to truth, but to performance. Have you ever noticed how the best talkers often rise faster than the best thinkers? Manipulation begins when words become tools for emotion rather than instruments of reason. The fool understands this instinctively. He senses the pulse of insecurity in others and plays it like a drum. He tells people what they want to hear, that they are special, enlightened, misunderstood geniuses trapped in a stupid world. It's the oldest trick in history. Flatter your followers, and they will defend you even when you lie. The pretender turns every critic into an enemy, every skeptic into a threat, every applause into validation. Soon, he is surrounded only by those who believe him, the echo chamber that keeps his illusion alive. But in that echo, something terrifying happens. He begins to believe himself. He stops pretending and starts preaching. And when the actor forgets he's acting, delusion replaces manipulation. Have you ever met someone who lies so often they begin to sound sincere, even to themselves? Crowds give birth to monsters. When the fool discovers that performance grants power, morality dissolves. He no longer speaks to understand, but to control belief. He learns the art of moral camouflage, wrapping selfish motives in noble language. He calls manipulation leadership, deceit strategy, and exploitation vision. This is how demagogues rise. They read the fears of the crowd and echo them back with fury. They don't need intelligence, they need timing. When the world is anxious, they promise order. When the world is lost, they promise meaning. And people follow, not because they are stupid, but because they are afraid. The pretender exploits fear the way a vulture exploits death, as opportunity. But when fear becomes currency, the truth dies quietly in the background. How many of today's so-called leaders are simply actors who learned how to weaponize panic? The puppet stage is not limited to politics. It thrives in corporations, classrooms, and friendships. The office charmer who repeats buzzwords until he's promoted. The influencer who packages platitudes as insight. The friend who always dominates the group's conversations. Each one learns the same trick: control perception, and you control people. They do not lead by truth, but by manipulation of mood. Their victims rarely notice. They walk away feeling inspired, not realizing they've been emptied. Because the most effective manipulation doesn't make you feel controlled, it makes you feel understood. That's the brilliance of the pretender. He steals your agreement before you realize you've given it. And by the time you question it, you're already repeating his words as if they were your own. Tell me, how many of your opinions were actually chosen by you? In the puppet stage, intelligence becomes theater, leadership becomes illusion, and the line between wisdom and deceit disappears entirely. The pretender reigns not because he is capable, but because others crave the certainty he sells. He speaks like a god, but thinks like a parasite. His followers worship his words until one day, inevitably, reality demands proof. That is when the performance begins to crumble. Because when the spotlight fades and applause turns to silence, there is nothing left to hide behind. The stage collapses, and when the curtain falls, what remains of the man who built his life on pretending? When the curtain falls, the silence is deafening. Reality has no patience for illusion. It demands proof, results, substance, competence. And this is the moment every pretender dreads: the collapse. The mask that once impressed now suffocates. The words that once inspired now expose. Every false expert, every loud fraud, every self-proclaimed genius eventually faces a moment when performance is no longer enough. It happens quietly, often without warning. A decision must be made, a project must deliver, a question must be answered. And suddenly, the fool discovers that confidence cannot substitute for knowledge. His rehearsed vocabulary disintegrates, his practiced composure trembles. Because while pretense thrives in conversation, it dies in confrontation. When reality asks for proof, the actor has nothing to show but air. Have you ever seen someone who talks endlessly about their plans suddenly disappear when it's time to execute them? The collapse doesn't happen all at once. It begins with a flicker, a hesitation, a contradiction, a small exposure that others pretend not to notice. But reality is a predator. It smells weakness. Once the first crack appears, it spreads. The crowd that once applauded begins to whisper. Doubt infects admiration like a disease. The same followers who worship the pretender start to withdraw, not out of principle, but out of fear of association. The applause fades, and the silence grows heavy. And in that silence, the fool begins to panic. He doubles down, grows louder, more defensive, more erratic. He thinks he can shout the truth into submission. But the more he talks, the more obvious his emptiness becomes. That's how exposure works. It doesn't humiliate immediately. It lets the fool humiliate himself. Tell me, have you ever watched someone's confidence collapse in real time? The fall of a pretender is not tragic, it is inevitable. Because lies demand constant maintenance, and maintenance is exhausting. The performance becomes too heavy to carry. The fool begins to contradict himself, forgetting his own stories, misquoting his own brilliance. The web of deceit tightens until he can no longer move. The same words that once protected him now betray him. Every sentence becomes a confession. You can see it in his eyes, that flicker of fear when someone asks a question too specific. The mind that once flowed with empty eloquence becomes paralyzed by truth. And in that paralysis, the mask begins to slip. The fool's greatest terror is not that others will stop believing him, it's that he will stop believing himself. Once that happens, the collapse is complete. But the ruin isn't just his reputation, it's his identity. How do you rebuild yourself when your entire existence was built on being impressive? The collapse often takes others with it. The followers, once enchanted, now feel betrayed. They realize they never admired the pretender's mind, only their own reflection in his flattery. Disillusionment breeds resentment, and resentment turns to hatred. The same crowd that once celebrated him now mocks him, dissects his words, exposes his contradictions. The puppet master becomes the puppet. His name, once a symbol of cleverness, becomes a warning. People whisper, he talked big, but he couldn't deliver. And yet the cycle repeats. The next pretender rises, learning from the last one's mistakes, adapting the illusion to new audiences. Because while fools collapse, stupidity evolves. It changes its language, its costume, its strategy. It never disappears. Every generation must face its own breed of pretenders. Do you recognize yours? What makes the collapse even crueler is that it is self-inflicted. No one forces the fool to lie. He chooses it, again and again, because pretending feels safer than humility. But the truth is merciless. It always collects its debt. The collapse is simply the payment coming due. Some pay with reputation, some with credibility, some with peace of mind. The wise understand this and remain cautious, deliberate, quiet. The fool rushes to speak, to promise, to perform, and every word he utters is another loan taken from truth, accruing interest. By the time it's repaid, the cost is unbearable. Entire careers end this way, not through malice, but through performance fatigue. The body can only sustain deceit for so long before the mind begins to crack, and when it does, all that remains is the silence he once feared. Have you ever noticed that those who talk the most about truth are often the first to be exposed by it? The collapse also reveals something darker about human nature. People don't truly want truth. They want entertainment that feels like truth. The pretender provides that. He makes life dramatic, exciting, full of certainty. When he falls, people mourn not his downfall, but the loss of their illusion. They miss the simplicity he offered, the comfort of being told what to believe. That's why even after the exposure, many continue to defend him. They'd rather cling to the performance than face the complexity of reality. This is the cost of false intelligence. It doesn't just destroy the fool, it corrupts those who follow him. Because when a lie comforts more than truth challenges, society becomes complicit. So ask yourself, are you applauding because something is true, or because it makes you feel safe? In the end, every pretender meets the same fate: silence. The room that once echoed with his words grows quiet. His followers move on. His admirers vanish. His relevance evaporates. The empire built on confidence returns to dust. But in that silence lies a cruel irony. Had he embraced ignorance, he might have grown wise. Had he admitted weakness, he might have become strong. The collapse is not the punishment, it's the mirror. It shows what happens when the pursuit of appearance replaces the pursuit of truth. And yet, as the dust settles, a question remains, lingering like smoke in the air. In a world addicted to performance, how do you know when it's your turn to fall? The danger doesn't end with their collapse. It begins to spread. Because the fool who pretends to be wise rarely falls alone. His poison lingers in the minds he has influenced, in the language he has corrupted, in the culture he has shaped. The people who admired him now imitate him. His arrogance becomes their standard. His hollow vocabulary becomes their tongue. His addiction to applause becomes their goal. This is how stupidity becomes contagious, not through ignorance but through influence. Surround yourself with pretenders, and you will begin to perform too. You'll start exaggerating your insights, editing your humility, polishing your every word to sound impressive. You won't even notice the infection at first. It feels like confidence, but slowly it rewires your motives. You stop learning to understand and start learning to impress. You stop thinking for yourself and start thinking about how you appear. How many of your thoughts today were shaped by people who only pretended to be intelligent? The danger is subtle because it disguises itself as ambition. When you spend enough time around those who fake intellect, you begin to confuse arrogance with self-belief. You start adopting their tone, their cynicism, their performative calm. You measure worth not by wisdom but by wit. You begin to fear being seen as naive, even when naivety is simply curiosity in its purest form. The pretender's presence teaches you to hide your questions, to silence your wonder, to replace sincerity with performance. Before long, your humility, the seed of real intelligence, dies quietly inside you. And without humility, you stop evolving. You become one of them, a mirror reflecting another mirror, endlessly imitating, never thinking. Have you noticed how being around certain people makes you talk more but think less? Environments infected by pretenders become cemeteries of potential. Offices filled with performers stop innovating. Classrooms filled with egos stop learning. Friendships built on cleverness stop being honest. Everyone becomes an actor in a play where the script is admiration and the audience is each other. Truth becomes dangerous because it threatens the illusion that holds the group together. So people stop saying what they really think. They nod, they agree, they quote, they exchange intelligence for acceptance. It's not stupidity that kills brilliance. It's conformity disguised as intellect. You'll see it in every room where everyone sounds smart, but nothing ever changes. That's the mark of corruption. Endless words, no progress. Have you ever been in a conversation that sounded intelligent but left you emptier than silence? The greatest threat is not that these pretenders will deceive you, it's that they will drain you. They feed on validation, and you will feel it. Every time you speak truth around them, they will mock it or minimize it. Every time you show humility, they will treat it as weakness. Every attempt at sincerity will be twisted into vulnerability. They cannot tolerate authenticity because it exposes them, so they will drag you into their game. They will teach you to defend yourself with sarcasm, to hide behind intellect, to compete for admiration. It's a slow moral erosion, not of knowledge, but of soul. You begin censoring yourself, not out of wisdom, but out of fear of appearing less smart. And in doing so, you become their reflection. Tell me, how much of your honesty have you already traded for social survival? To surround yourself with pretenders is to live inside distortion. Their presence reshapes your instincts. You stop trusting your intuition because they always seem more articulate. You second-guess your clarity because their confusion sounds intelligent. They drown truth in style, and soon you begin to crave the same attention they receive. You start performing too, correcting others for small mistakes, quoting ideas you don't fully grasp, pretending to know more than you do. It feels harmless, but each act separates you further from reality. You begin living in a theater where everyone applauds everyone else's act, and in that noise no one grows. You think you're learning, but you're decaying. You think you're progressing, but you're performing, and the applause becomes addictive. Once you hear it, how do you ever go back to silence? Even one pretender in your circle is enough to corrupt your clarity. They inject subtle poison into every discussion, cynicism disguised as insight, mockery disguised as intellect. You walk away questioning yourself, not because you're wrong, but because you spoke truth without embellishment. They will make you feel inadequate for being simple, foolish for being sincere, and childish for being curious. That's how they spread. They make you ashamed of the very traits that could make you great. It's not intelligence that protects you from them, it's discernment. The courage to say, "I don't know," when everyone else pretends they do. The strength to stay quiet when everyone else is performing. Few can resist that pressure, can you? The true danger of surrounding yourself with pretenders is that they don't just alter how you speak, they alter how you think. Over time, you forget what genuine thought feels like. You lose the joy of discovery, the peace of uncertainty, the thrill of humility. Everything becomes competition. Every conversation becomes theater. You start mistaking performance for power, cleverness for clarity, confidence for competence. And then one day you wake up and realize you've become one of them. You are still applauded, still admired, still surrounded, but deeply alone because everyone around you is playing the same game. So the real question isn't how to spot the pretenders around you. It's this: when did you start pretending too? The cost of imitation is invisible at first. You tell yourself it's harmless, that pretending a little, exaggerating a little, speaking with more confidence than you truly feel is simply what the world demands. You justify it as adapting, networking, playing the game. But every mask you wear rewires your character. Every time you fake understanding instead of admitting ignorance, you teach yourself to value perception over truth. And the more you do it, the more distant you become from who you are. The world doesn't punish this immediately. In fact, it rewards it. You'll gain respect, attention, maybe even success. But these are counterfeit rewards. They look real until you realize they've brought you into a prison, the endless obligation to keep pretending. Once the world believes you're smarter than you are, you must perform that role forever. How many people do you know who are trapped in identities they built just to impress others? The hidden cost of false intelligence is credibility. It erodes slowly, the way rust eats through iron. Once you've been caught pretending, even once, people stop trusting your judgment. Every statement you make afterward carries the faint smell of performance. They might still smile, still nod, but they no longer listen. And reputation, once fractured, rarely heals. You'll try to overcompensate, speak louder, study harder, insist you've changed, but the damage lingers. The wise forgive, but they never forget. And in a world built on perception, credibility is currency. Lose it, and you're bankrupt, no matter how clever you sound. That's why true intellect is patient, cautious, and understated. It doesn't rush to speak or boast. It allows its results to speak. The pretender never learns this until it's too late. By the time he realizes that credibility is more valuable than charisma, he's already spent it all. Have you noticed how people who talk too much always end up explaining themselves? There is also a cost to your peace. When you pretend to be smarter than you are, you live in constant vigilance. Every conversation becomes a battlefield where you must maintain the illusion. You listen not to learn, but to prepare your next defense. You avoid questions that might expose you, deflect discussions you don't understand, and surround yourself with those who will not challenge you. It's exhausting. The anxiety of being found out never leaves. It keeps you awake at night, crafting explanations, rehearsing responses, polishing your disguise. And for what? To maintain an image that brings no real joy. Pretending to be intelligent is not empowerment, it's enslavement. You don't own your persona, it owns you. Tell me, how can a man claim to be wise when he fears being honest? The cost extends beyond you. Those who fake intelligence create collateral damage. They mislead others, distort decisions, and derail progress. When leaders pretend to know, teams fail. When teachers pretend to understand, students suffer. When friends pretend to advise, trust dies. Every false performance echoes outward, infecting others with misinformation and confusion. A single lie of intellect can waste years of someone's time. It convinces people to follow wrong paths, invest in wrong ideas, and trust the wrong people. And yet, the pretender rarely feels the weight of this. His ego protects him from guilt, telling him that everyone else does the same. But not everyone does. Some people still crave honesty. Some still hunger for truth. And when they realize they've been misled by a fraud, something inside them breaks, not just faith in the pretender, but faith in wisdom itself. How many minds have been lost because they trusted someone who only sounded wise? But the most devastating cost is internal decay. Pretending to be intelligent doesn't just deceive others, it corrodes your own ability to learn. When you act as though you already know, your mind stops receiving. You filter every lesson through pride. You can't absorb correction, can't endure ignorance, can't begin again. Growth requires humility, but pretense replaces it with self-defense. You may continue accumulating facts, but you'll lose wisdom. Knowledge without humility is like water poured onto stone. It flows, but never sinks in. This is why pretenders stagnate even as they accumulate. They collect words, books, and theories, but never transform. Because transformation requires surrender, the willingness to look foolish before becoming wise. And fools cannot bear that humiliation. Tell me, when was the last time you learned something that made you feel small? The hidden cost of imitation is spiritual death. When you abandon truth for performance, you separate yourself from reality. You begin to live in fiction, a curated self who exists only for admiration. You no longer think, you rehearse. You no longer speak, you perform. You begin filtering even your private thoughts through your imagined audience, rehearsing every opinion for applause that isn't there. You forget the sound of your own mind when it isn't trying to impress anyone. This is the quiet tragedy of modern intelligence. People so busy looking wise that they've forgotten how to think. They are experts in performance, amateurs in reflection, and they live in constant tension because the self they show the world is not the one that stares back at them in silence. That's why so many successful people feel hollow. Their brilliance is borrowed, their applause is rented, their peace is gone. Do you still remember who you were before you started pretending? There comes a point when the game exhausts even its master. When the applause no longer thrills, when the compliments begin to sound rehearsed, when the admiration feels strangely hollow, that's when the pretender begins to see the emptiness of his pursuit. But by then, the damage is already done. The world remembers him, not for what he accomplished, but for how well he performed. His name carries a faint echo of brilliance that never truly existed. And though he stands surrounded by admirers, he feels a quiet panic rising inside him, the realization that no one actually knows him. He has become a symbol, a projection, a ghost of intellect floating between applause and emptiness. This is the hidden cost of imitation. It grants visibility, but erases identity. You gain recognition, but lose reality. You become seen by all, but known by none. Tell me, what is success worth if it costs you the truth of who you are? The path of real power begins where pretense dies. It begins in silence, in the humility of not knowing, in the discipline of observation, in the courage to think before speaking. True intelligence doesn't announce itself. It moves quietly, steadily, like a shadow that shapes empires without ever needing to boast. The wise man doesn't seek to appear intelligent. He seeks to be effective. He spends more time refining his craft than explaining it. He measures progress not by attention but by accuracy. His mind is a weapon, sharp, hidden, and precise. He has no interest in impressing anyone because he knows what impression costs: focus, clarity, peace. The powerful are not those who speak the most, but those who speak last, after everyone else has revealed their ignorance. And when they do speak, their words change the temperature of the room. Have you ever noticed how the truly intelligent often say the least? Real power is forged in restraint. It grows in the ability to withhold, to listen, to calculate before revealing. The pretender must always fill the silence. The wise allow silence to speak for them. In a world that rewards noise, silence becomes a weapon. It unsettles the arrogant, confuses the insecure, and commands respect without effort. This is the paradox of mastery. The less you need to prove, the more powerful you become. When a fool is loud, he demands validation. When a wise man is quiet, he radiates certainty. His calmness is not emptiness, it's control. He doesn't waste energy performing intelligence, he invests it in understanding. And so, while others chase recognition, he builds results. That's why real power is invisible until it's undeniable. By the time people notice it, it's already too late to challenge it. So ask yourself, are you building noise or building proof? The truly wise embrace obscurity. They are patient in their growth, deliberate in their actions, detached from opinion. They don't seek to be seen, they seek to be irreplaceable. They don't chase the spotlight, they build the infrastructure beneath it. Their focus is cold, methodical, and disciplined. They understand that every minute spent seeking attention is a minute stolen from mastery. They would rather be misunderstood for years than exposed for pretending, and because of that they win in silence. The fool measures himself by applause. The wise measure themselves by control. Control of thought, control of speech, control of emotion. The fool reacts, the wise respond. The fool imitates, the wise create. The fool performs, the wise build. Which one do you think history remembers? True power also requires humility, not the submissive kind, but the strategic kind. The humility to learn from failure, to recognize limits, to study enemies, to observe without announcing. The wise man treats every defeat as reconnaissance. He knows that appearing weak is sometimes the greatest strength, that being underestimated grants freedom, that quiet understanding of self is worth more than loud approval from others. He doesn't need to look brilliant because he already knows his worth. This is the opposite of the fool's hunger. The pretender needs witnesses, the wise need results. And when the two meet, one is remembered for his speeches, the other for his empire. But tell me, which legacy lasts longer, the echo or the foundation? To walk the path of real power is to choose solitude over performance. You will lose the comfort of being admired. You will be misunderstood, mocked, underestimated, but you will also be free. Free from the exhausting need to appear, free from the noise of validation, free from the fragility of pretending. In this silence, clarity returns. You begin to see how little others truly know, how much time is wasted on display, and you stop playing. You begin to study, to build, to move with precision. Your words become fewer, but heavier. Your actions become quieter, but sharper. And when the time comes to act, no one will see it coming, because while they were performing, you were preparing. So I ask you, when the spotlight fades and the noise dies down, will you still have anything left to show? And still, they never learn. The cycle repeats, century after century, the rise of the pretender, the applause of the crowd, the inevitable collapse, and the silence that follows. It is as if humanity is addicted to illusion, forever mistaking confidence for competence, language for wisdom, theater for truth. The world keeps creating new stages for the same performance: politics, academia, media, even faith. Each one filled with people rehearsing intelligence instead of pursuing it. They learn the right tone, the right vocabulary, the right pose, but never the right discipline. And when their towers of imitation crumble, another generation steps forward, eager to rebuild them with the same vanity. We have replaced truth with spectacle so completely that even honesty now feels awkward, suspicious, out of place. Tell me, when did authenticity start sounding like weakness to you? You can see it everywhere, if you pay attention. The loudest voices always draw the largest crowds. The cleverest liars always get the longest applause. And those who see through it are called cynical, when in fact they are simply awake. This is the great paradox of modern intelligence. The less people know, the more they crave to appear informed. The less they understand, the more they speak. It's not stupidity that spreads, It's insecurity dressed as certainty. Every social space has become a stage, every conversation a performance. People don't talk to connect anymore, they talk to compete. They don't share thoughts, they exchange superiority. Everyone is pretending to be above everyone else, and in that invisible war, truth is the first casualty. Have you ever felt that most people talk not to communicate, but to escape their own silence? The danger of this illusion is not just that it deceives others, it corrupts perception itself. The more you perform, the less you remember how to perceive reality without an audience. You stop thinking privately, you stop feeling sincerely, you become an echo chamber of yourself, trapped in the loop of performance. Even solitude becomes theater. You rehearse your thoughts as if someone were listening. You can no longer rest. The performance never ends, because it has fused with identity. This is the final stage of the pretender, when he no longer knows he's acting. He wakes up rehearsing, he sleeps calculating, and he dies defending an illusion that never existed. And the crowd, the very one that made him, moves on to the next voice that sounds certain. How many people do you know who confuse personality with presence, noise with knowledge, and influence with insight? And yet, the truly intelligent have always known the truth. The world doesn't reward wisdom, it rewards persuasion. Those who master illusion often rise faster than those who master reality. But what they gain in speed, they lose in depth. Their ascent is loud but brief, their fall quiet but final. Real power, the kind that survives collapse, belongs only to those who no longer care to impress. The silent builders, the watchful thinkers, the disciplined few who understand that mystery is might. They do not announce themselves, they do not argue, they do not explain, they let time do their speaking. And when time speaks, it speaks with finality. The crowd forgets the performers, but remembers the architects. The question is, are you building applause, or are you building legacy? Every pretender eventually learns that attention is a drug with no cure. Once you taste it, you spend your life chasing the next hit, the next compliment, the next spotlight, the next proof of your superiority. But each hit empties you further, until all that remains is the echo of who you pretended to be. The wise avoid this addiction altogether. They learn to detach from recognition, to operate unseen, to move without needing eyes upon them. They know that power loses its purity the moment it is displayed. They guard their competence in silence like treasure. They build in shadows, where judgment cannot reach. They act and then disappear. The world calls them mysterious, but the truth is simpler. They are just free. Free from pretense, free from noise, free from the disease of needing to appear intelligent. Can you imagine a life where you no longer need to prove anything? And so the question remains, not who is pretending, but why we still admire them. Why we allow ourselves to be ruled by confidence instead of clarity. Why we cheer the actors and ignore the thinkers. Why we reward those who sound wise instead of those who are. Perhaps it's because performance is easier to understand than truth. Truth requires effort, silence, humility, and those are not fashionable virtues. But fashion fades and truth endures. It always does. Somewhere behind the noise, behind the endless talking, behind the bright stage lights, there are still a few minds working in silence, cold, patient, deliberate. They are the ones building what the rest of the world will later pretend to have understood. You won't see them, you won't hear them, but when they move, you will feel it. And when that day comes, when silence begins to speak louder than all the noise, will you still be performing, or will you finally listen? If you've made it this far, it's because a part of you already knows this truth. Stupidity always hides behind the mask of wisdom. The loudest voices are often the emptiest minds, and their performance fools the herd, but never reality. Now tell me in the comments, are you ready to stop imitating the pretenders? To stop chasing the applause of fools? Are you willing to stay silent, to build quietly, and let results speak where words fail? If this message touched you, if it made sense, write in the comments. I choose substance. Let's see how many here are truly ready to abandon false wisdom for real power. And don't forget, keep watching the next video. It's important, much more than you imagine. See you there.